Good afternoon. Now, I have the great pleasure, really, to introduce a person that we have met many times before, Professor Philip from Singapore Management University. Now, for the next session, and the session is entitled, "It Takes a Village to Raise a University, Integrating Education and Research with Practice." Now, this topic brings to focus the need for research and to blend research and education into practice in the university. And I think it's if you remember the old Frank Sinatra song, you probably remember it's like love and marriage, it's like horse and carriage, it kind of goes together. So let's put our hands together and let Philip take the lead and share with us his thoughts on the topic. Thank you very much, Philip.
Hello? There we go. Okay, great. Thanks. I'm sorry for the slow start. So, my name is Philip Zerrillo. I come from Singapore Management University. I'm going to talk a little bit about the West and a little bit about the East as we go through the day. As I think about this and I think about everything that we've seen here today and all of the talks that we've seen up to this point, it's just a very, very complex problem. And I don't hope to in any way solve the whole problem. But what I'm going to do is take one small chunk of it today. And on my closing slide, I'm going to tell you how we're working towards solving one piece of this puzzle. So if I look at, let's take the American experience. We've heard a lot about that today. And if we look at since 1980 and we look at state funding in the United States, we see that state funding has fallen by a little over 60%. It's about 62% that the funding by the states themselves has dropped as a percentage of the overall funding of college education or higher education. Now, a more current number might be that's from 1999 to 2011, so in that 12-year period, U.S. median income rose 2.1%. Now, that's a paltry sum for a 12-year period, right? At the same time, student debt rose by, wait for it, 450%. Okay, so at the same time that family income or median income is rising very, 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 very slowly at roughly about 0.1% per year, we find that average student debt is growing 450% over a 12-year period. Just an incredible mismatch. Government is in essence, becoming less of a source of the funding and more of simply a gatekeeper and an overseer in the educational process, which I think I heard some of the speakers alluding to earlier today. I think they're going to be the ones that are going to shape what it is that we can do. They're going to shape the playing field, but them as a source of funding, it's just not going to be there in the future. I could see that even in a place like Singapore, where I work today, and we look at the funding budget on research, and the funding budget on research goes down 5% each and every year. If I look at our tuition, and we get a 1% or a 2% increase in tuition and fees, while recognizing that our costs are going up at 5 to 6% per year. So the model is really a difficult model. And what we see, certainly in the West, right, if we're looking at a 2% increase in median income and a 450% increase in the student debt, it's just an unsustainable bubble, right? I mean, young people might be hoodwinked, convinced, or otherwise somehow disillusioned into going to university, but from a long-term payout standpoint, it really just doesn't make a lot of sense the way it's currently configured in the direction that it's headed. Okay, so just a couple of more quick facts. Increasing, if we look at higher education, as we talked about last year when I was here in this room, I said higher education is increasing about 50% faster than healthcare costs. From 1980 to 2011, healthcare costs went up 287%. At the same time, higher education costs went up 453%. Now, what are we doing? okay, to come to grips with that unsustainable model is we're looking to new technologies as a way to be able to reduce our instructional costs. Right? All these things like the MOOCs and new technologies, and when I look at how universities are starting to combine faculties to teach what they consider to be non-essential or non-core courses, these are all really efforts to bring the cost down. We could cloak it in a lot of different terminology. Yes, it is new technology. Yes, it's great technology. It's a new way to engage people. But what's really forcing it, these universities would not be coming out of the dark ages if it was not for the fact that they have to in some respects. The model is changing, and the economic gravity of the situation is pushing them to do some things that they don't want to do and they haven't done in the past. Now look, if I think about the old model of what it was that we thought we did in universities, we all lie somewhere on this spectrum between research and teaching, right? We always thought of it as, well, we have to do teaching and we also have to do research. University is a place of ideas, a place of scholarship, and that comes together at this point. Now, if we think about what did teaching do for us, well, it satisfied our students, it satisfied regulators, it made companies happy or employers potentially happy. There was a bit of government funding, and we looked at a long-term relationship with our students that might lead to one day having some donations. If I look at research has always been that side of the house where universities wanted to spend quite a bit of their time. And what did they get out of it? Well, they got great peer evaluations, right? Other universities looked at them. They could recruit talent. They could get better and better faculty and become a place for ideas. And thusly, they would influence knowledge and they would take a leadership position in the knowledge field. Also, this was a great way to get grants from governments, as if you had good scholarship, great studies coming out, then all of a sudden government funding, government relations, and the overall personal fulfillment of your faculty as they moved along that knowledge curve was really something to be striving towards. Okay, now, it's not everybody's game, right? It's not something that everybody does and does well, right? And there's always an emphasis between the two edges, right? But one thing that we find is that as you try to get into the middle, and the middle is a very, very difficult place between the two extremes of being simply a teaching university and simply a research house, very, very difficult. It's very much a dual purpose, and it really requires a human resource portfolio of faculty that's quite a bit different. You have to be able to integrate these different groups, your practice track, your tenure track, your research track, your education track, whatever we're going to use for names. It's the sort of thing that this is one of the most difficult things for university administrators to administer to. Okay, now, one of the problems for us in universities is, I think, goes right back to one of the first slides we saw this morning, where the people were 600 years ago standing in front giving their first lecture, is that, we're a factory. Right? And that's the way we've considered ourselves. Well, we would hate to think of ourselves in that way. Very often universities are really a place that has a factory, and that factory turns out the sausage. Right? What they do is they crank out the same sausage year in and year out. Okay, universities are a product of their origins. Right? It's when they came about. When they were conceived, most of these universities got going when? During the Industrial Revolution. And they tended to be very, very asset heavy. That is, they went out, they built buildings, they got lots and lots of grounds, and they've changed their models only incrementally, right? Because they were very much, you come to our place, we have our assets right here, we have buildings, we have grounds, and a university was brick and mortar, okay? It's starting to change, okay? But universities have always produced what they believed was needed, or what what was wanted in the marketplace, or moreover, okay, what was the easiest for them to produce today? And if anybody doesn't think this is still going on, I can take you into several of the universities I've been administering, and I can tell you, when I look at the degree programs that come across my desk, what they are is simply the faculty coming together and saying, we can teach 15 classes in this area, why don't we call it a degree, and maybe we'll make a little bit of money doing it. On the other hand, they're really not asking, what does the marketplace want? What does the student want? How are we going to place that student at the end of the day? And what it is it's a very, very faculty-centric model. Now, it's starting to change, okay? There is change, and today what's happening is the student is moving more into the center of the educational experience, okay? It's more prevalent, student centricity. It's a market response, right, as they look for those students. And as Paul pointed out in his opening talk this morning, and it's also a natural evolution, is that eventually what happens is you start out making a product, and eventually you start saying, well, why should I make a product? Why don't I ask the marketplace what the marketplace wants, and I'll make to the market demand, right? So what's happening is it's a little bit of all of the above is pushing us into this more student-centric model. Now, if I think about teaching, right, and teaching has really evolved, because today it's really not about teaching, right? Teaching was always seen by faculty to be the student experience, but the student experience is so much broader than that today. And if I think about what is the student experience, it's really what I would call student life. And student life is, can they get funding, right? We have to have an office that handles their funding and helps them to be able to go out and garner the funds to be able to stay in school so we don't see these large attrition rates. It's all about the amenities. It's about the courses. It's about their accommodations while they're there, the curriculum, et cetera, right? All of these things begin to bubble up. And what we're finding is that it's not just about teaching, and it's not just about making sausage. It's about a much, much, much more complex student experience that we have to manage as the students go through the university. Now, we've all been touching on these throughout the day, okay? And I won't pile on this topic, okay? But what happens with this is that we see a lot more complexity in our businesses, which tends for us to lose scale, right? As we get more and more complex, it's difficult for us to get scale in our businesses. Our human resources and all of the assets that we need become extremely varied, which tends to make things expensive. We get layers of management. We have oversight issues. All these kind of things add to the cost side of our equation. Now, what are schools trying to do? Well, they're trying to wrestle with this. And what happens is they embark upon activities to try to bring down costs. Okay, so what they will do is they will go out and they will take the teaching side. And what they'll do is look at cooperative teaching programs where they can take and put students from different universities into the same classroom. They'll look for educational technology to bring down that cost. They'll do research with the corporations, right, where they bring the corporations in. They'll engage in commercial activities with the research parks, patenting offices, things of this nature. All these kind of things that are starting to happen. One of the things that I noticed, and what I was preparing for this talk, I was talking to the people at CBRE, which is CB Richard Ellis, a real estate firm. And they said, we have a special office now that works on leasing with higher education institutions. I said, what do you mean? They said, well, what we do is all of these universities are looking at their real estate as very, very significant assets, and what they're doing is looking for ways to rent that stuff out or sell it and lease it back or whatever we're talking about, but different types of funding arrangements to be able to liquidate or to be able to develop an annuitization out of those heavy assets that they have in place. So what's happening is they're divesting of those physical assets either in principle or by agreement, and they're looking for future funding schemes. In my state, where I live in the United States, my home is in Texas, and in Texas we have a funding scheme where you can buy your children's college tuition today. So you can pay for it today, and then whenever your child gets to that age, they're guaranteed that price, okay? So some of the things that we're doing to bridge the funding gap is if I look at it, and I think about knowledge creation, knowledge capture, knowledge commercialization, and turning that commercialization into revenue. What I see is that universities are going into research parks and co-investment labs. They've got licensing offices, IP departments. They're looking at royalty rates, how to evaluate them, et cetera, et cetera. And what we're seeing is that universities are getting more and more diligent about looking at these financial activities within the organization. And where I see a lot of this coming out of is the engineering departments, and I see a lot of this coming out of the medical schools. When I was at the at Emory University, I saw where they had just released a new HIV treatment drug, and they were able to earn $650 million for the university out of that one particular drug. So these are really, really opportunities for big gains. Now, the emerging model, and where I think we need to start looking, is that it's not going to just be research, it's not just going to be teaching, but the thing I've been hearing throughout the day is that it's also going to be the practitioners or the practice. And then what we have to do is begin to bring that in. Now, I want to tell you very, very quickly, and I'll just spend 1 minute, maybe 2 minutes, because I have only 2 minutes, about what we tried to do at Singapore Management University. Now, when I first got down to Singapore Management University, what I did is I looked around and I said, boy, there's not a lot of stories about what happens here in Singapore. So what we did is we first opened up a case writing initiative. And the case writing initiative was to tell the stories about what's going on out here in Asia. Now we looked at this and we said, okay, what will this do? This will help to get our faculty out the door. It'll get them into companies. They'll begin to learn those stories. And when they go back in the classroom, they've got better stories to tell. Because they don't just read a teaching note from Harvard, they get out and they write that case in these companies. They look at the company, they smell the company, they hear the company, they know the management of the company, they've seen the people sweat. It's a very different experience. It transformed our faculty. Now, what I did is I recognized, look, we don't want to stop just at writing cases. We want to move into journals. We want to move into telling the stories of these companies out here in the region by writing the books of these companies. So what we've done is we've created a stream here called Communication and Dissemination. And what we do is we have the case writing initiative. Now what we've done is we've opened up 2 different journals, and what we're doing is we're bringing in postdocs and things like this. Now on the other side of the curve is the idea that what we needed a place for faculty to be developed. So what we've done is we've got faculty teaching camps, faculty teaching certification, co-teaching and mentoring programs. And what we're doing is sending faculty out to immerse them in the businesses. We're asking for executives to come into residence, and what we're doing is pushing faculty out into the field. And this is all across the university. It's not just in the business school. It's the School of Information Sciences. It's a law school. It's we're putting people from the social sciences schools into government agencies and what have you. And then the last piece here is to align with corporations. And we're doing it in a number of different ways, from advisory boards to speakers bureaus to a coaching network to handling projects and pushing those projects out to our students. So, as I summarize, just in one quick second, as I summarize, I think that, the interplay between research and teaching is going to be very, very important. But I think one of the things that we all have to recognize is that third leg on the stool is going to be this practice side. And one of the things that we've done, or we've been trying to do, is develop an emphasis at the university on practice as a way of engaging people. Thank you.
Such a difficult topic to cover in 15 minutes. Philip, well done. Can we open up for questions from the floor, please? Any questions? Shall I say no tea if no questions?
I'm okay.
Okay.
All set?
No? Oh, this one.
Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Are we saying that looking at the history of education, that in the early part and to now, looking at the whole spectrum of education, it was very institutionalized? Considering what it is now, do you think that it's less institutionalized or it remains the same?
Well, my feeling is, looking at the American model in particular, it's less institutionalized than it was on some dimensions. Other dimensions, it's more so. Not a very good answer, right? But on the one side, it used to be that we always thought of college as a place that you had to make the college schedule. You had to go to school when the college said. And, I started out, my university teaching was at the University of Texas. Now, Austin, Texas is now the 14th largest city in America. But the place very much grew up around the idea that we are out in the country, students come here, we only teach classes from 9 to 5, That's it. We're done 9 to 5. We teach 9 months a year, and we offer 10% of what we offer the rest of the year during the summer. Now, they've amended, right? Because they're part of a larger ecosystem, being the city of Austin and the state of Texas. So they offer year-round education, year-round degrees. They're offering a lot more night classes and things like this. Night classes used to comprise a half of 1% of the university's classes in 1998. Today, it's 11% of the university's classes. So they have changed and become more market adapted. On the other hand, accreditation boards, governing boards, government, they're not going to allow you to change a great deal, right? I mean, what they've done is just simply restrict these models over and over and over again with these accreditation boards and what have you. I think some of the creativity is being taken out of our field by accreditation. Right? Yes, sir.
I just thought it would be interesting to connect a couple of dots. I found your factory analogy very interesting, Philip, that, if you think about higher education institutions, around 2000, Bill Gates gave a speech to the National Governors Association US, and he actually said, if you think about high schools as factories, it's very different. They were designed, the modern U.S., quote-unquote, modern U.S. high school was designed just after World War II and largely were implemented. And in that generation, harkening back, Bill, to your talk, at that time, only a relatively small percentage of students were ever expected to aspire to university education.
Yep.
And so guess what the factories have done now for 5 decades? They've done exactly what they were designed to do. And I think, and Gates went on to point out that to fault the factory managers, i.e. the school principals, or the faculty of the factory is entirely wrong, because they're doing exactly, again, what they were designed to do. I think our modern universities actually succumb to that, as you've said as well.
Yeah.
And then to complete the dots, Patty, your talk relative to the Gates Foundation actually sponsoring what you're doing, really I think that the Gates Foundation is attempting both at secondary level as well as tertiary to try to re-engineer the factory, to start afresh. Because it's so much easier typically to start from scratch than it is to try to completely reform. It's very difficult. Just an observation.
Yeah, and I think, and I think going back to one of our earlier speakers' points, is that if you're looking for the government to do this, right, to be the spark that's going to create the difference, it ain't happening in any government anywhere. Okay, I mean, one of the things that you've got to watch out for is that, education is one of those things that gets politicized, right? And what they're constantly doing is trying to, portray that they're very much engaged in higher education, very supportive of it, but the numbers don't lie, right? Is worldwide, state funding of education is going down year in and year out. Right? Governments are not funding these institutions.
Yeah, there's a question there.
Dr. Philip,
Yeah.
now that you have in SMU for quite a number of years, and looking into the teaching research nexus, which is actually very perforated at the moment, to what extent, when you compare education, higher education in Singapore, different from the United States? And have they come up with something that the world can learn from? Thank you.
Oh, that's a tough question for me. I still don't feel like I know the Singaporean model, despite the number of years I've been administering down there. But some of the things that Singapore is very, very comfortable to do is Singapore is very comfortable with basic level research. So if I look at the schools with science departments and what have you, the amount of funding that is available for experimentation and research is very, very high. Okay, what they still are reluctant to do is to put money onto the commercialization side. So Singapore is number 3 in the world in IP creation, but when we start to look at the amount of commercialization of IP, they're really not finding it to be very highly commercialized. So they suffer in Singapore, I think, a little bit of that difficulty of, the only kind of research is still basic research. Now, the reason why I started this Center for Management Practice is my idea is we need to push the faculty to the membrane of practice. Is that if the faculty goes out and sees practice, you're going to get a much faster knowledge transfer of what's going on in the marketplace, what's going on in the industries, and what the you'll get a more vibrant and a quicker reformulation of curricula and updating and what have you, curricula, as well as research ideas.
Thank you. Just one last question. Yeah, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I think the other important issue, it was all about, so far, many of the talks are about what the universities take from society. I mean, the society paying for them. But the other important thing, they give a lot. I mean, cities, the success of cities are absolutely dependent on the success of universities. There are many examples and also the importance of universities being retained in the city, in the streets of the city, not out of town campuses. And I think that the bit is also with industry, with the internet, that companies can operate anywhere in the world and be a global. So I think one of the things I wanted to weave into the conversation is with the change of, with communication, both in education and in industry, that the important role of universities to the success of cities and also the failure of cities if the universities aren't successful. And that goes back to funding. The funding isn't just the cities are paying for the university so people can just learn. No, they're paying for something that makes the city successful, that generates taxation, that actually pays for the universities.
Yeah, you know, I mean, this is a really touchy issue in the United States right now. Is if you look at the economic progress, the economic progression of cities with first-tier universities and what have you, they tend to do much better. And as we've increasingly moved away from heavy industry and more to knowledge-based economy, you'll see that cities that have great universities and what have you tend to do very, very well comparatively to the places that don't have them. Now, one of the other difficulties, though, we have is the taxation issue and the government view towards any kind of a landholder or property holder. Now, I used to go around to the Council of Mayors in the United States, and I used to give speeches and talks to these guys about, you know, look at people like retailers and try to treat them well. You'll do very, very well. Somebody like a retailer, somebody like a hospital, somebody like a university, they're landlocked. They tend to be in that one place, and they tend to invest. They tend to keep their grounds up. They tend to employ people locally. They're really the best corporate citizen you can find in your local community. But what is it that they always want in a city? They want a big manufacturer that pays high manufacturing jobs. Well, manufacturers are, to your very first point, are portable in terms of their reputation because their product is consumed all over the world. So their name and their reputation is portable. But their source of production is also portable. On the other hand, universities tend to be landlocked. Hospitals tend to be landlocked. Retailers tend to be landlocked. And unfortunately, what happens is government taxation recognizes that these guys can't move, right? And you usually have a tremendous amount of antagonism between them and their local communities. But, as you say, those communities prosper much better.
Well, thank you so much, Philip. I'm afraid we can't take any more questions. Could you put your hands together for Philip?
Thank you.
Thanks. Over to you, Cillian. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Zerrillo and Dr. Rosalini.